Last week we got into NTFS in Chapter 9. Now in Chapter 10 we're going to get a little more in depth. So we started talking about the different metadata files associated with NTFS. So when you first format a drive, you automatically create these metadata files on your drive. These are system files. And I mentioned that one of the most important files on here is called the master file table and is designated as $MFT. So we're going to start looking at that and spending a lot of time in the MFT. So again, just to recap last week, every file and directory has at least one record in the MFT, and that includes the MFT itself. Files and directories can have more than one record, and about 12.5% of your drive is allocated to this file. So it sets aside space specifically for this file to grow. The first 16 records are reserved, and then 12 records, out of that, 12 and 16 are reserved for future use. So we actually use 16 records. 12 and 15 are reserved for future use, again starting counting at 0. And there's an additional 3 files that also are best described as metadata files, which are records 24 through 26. And again, once we get in looking at this, it'll start to make more sense when I'm talking about records. Okay. Now our definition really of what a file is a series of attributes. And I'm going to kind of use a spreadsheet as an analogy here. And get that centered in here. Yeah. Sorry about this. Keeps expanding on me. So if we're talking about attributes of an individual, you have their name. You can have age, you have weight, height, eye color. As a student, how many credits do they have? What's their GPA? Additionally, where do they live? Favorite food, so forth. And we can come up with all kinds of different attributes that define individuals. Okay, so we've got Bob. He's 46. Weight is 180. Height is 6'2". Eye color blue. He's going back to school, so he's taking 6 credits. GPA is 3.8. He lives in Iowa. Favorite food is steak. And we can just go through and continue. Mary, 21. I'm going to be careful with weight now for Mary. I should get mad. I want 109. She is 5'4". Green. She's got a full load. She got 15 credits. GPA 4.0. She also lives in Iowa. Favorite food, pizza. Okay. And we can just keep building for all the people. We can build the same table. So with files, it's the same way. We're defining the file based on its various attributes about it. Okay. So if we look at our attribute list, so here is the different possible attributes you can have for a file. First is called the standard information, which has its dates and times, like we saw with FAT. There's other things, again, you'll see file name listed in here, object identifier, its data, so that's the actual content. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at some of these different attributes that make up a file. Now, every file will have three common attributes. It will have the standard information attribute, the file name attribute, and the data attribute. And then every folder will have a standard information attribute, file name attribute, and index root attribute. And we'll go into greater detail on those later on. And so this is essentially what the records look like. Just like in our spreadsheet, you've got a row for each file. So it's going to start out with a record header, and then we'll have the standard information attribute, the data attribute, or excuse me, the file name attribute, then the data attribute, and then any record slack. And if additional attributes can be added as we go through. Okay. All the files or the records, this is what's in yellow here, that begins with a 56 byte header. So there's 56 bytes at the beginning of each one of these records, and we'll start going through that in more detail. And I should point out that this record is a fixed length in size, so it's 1024 bytes in size, so every single record will have that same length. Okay, so being 1024, that means it's made up of 2 sectors. Again, sectors 512. Okay. So our next section, we'll start delving into the header a little bit more.